Sanbonani, Dumelang Apsheni, hello. This is your boy Dalungza. This is one of our episode on design thinking with Lungile, whereby we are trying to craft new directions, particularly for the black community, so that we can have intended and carefully thought out outcomes for the future. Today I just coming to you live from Eguruleni, Davidton. They call it the Brazil of South African football. Oh, my daughter. Taimataya Tayotai Hutatabana, that is us. The home of Jabopole, the home of Tunakwanya, Teenage Laja, Skapse Malati, Roinkambule, you name them. They come from this place. This is a place booming with talent. This morning I woke up with a very interesting story where the beautiful, very talented Pabi Moloi is apparently being sued by her estranged husband. I'm using the term estranged husband because there hasn't been any confirmation that these people are divorcing, purely because as part of her defense, Pabi Moloi denies that there was any relationship from that matter, denies that there were any marriage. Now, one of the things that Ruan, who is the estranged, alleged husband of Pabi Moloi, is currently contesting that he is entitled to at least 50% of what would be perceived as their joint estate, as he argues that he and Pabi Moloi were married in customary law. And he said that due to the fact that he alleges that he had paid a lobola to the sum of 25,000 South African rands, and he says subsequent to that there was an exchanging of gifts, and he also alleges that he's got pictures to show and prove that there was such an event. Pabi, through her lawyer, has since denied these things, and he said she was never married to anyone, which effectively she denies the existence of this particular marriage. I was quite triggered by this because this is a discussion, or rather an argument, that I had with a very good friend of mine that I talked to mostly about different critical things, and we were talking about this matter. And I remember that the whole discussion was about the initial interpretation that I had about customary law, and this good friend of mine had brought to my attention a couple of case laws that have literally destroyed my initial perception of what constitutes a customary marriage. Now, I think before we actually go further, I must also state that I am not a legal professional. None of what we'll have I'm about to say is legal advice. And I would also encourage people to sought the services of a qualified lawyer, attorney that specializes in such things. These are just my interpretation as the average guy on the streets. And some of the dangers, there's something that I picked up that may become big problems for some of our people, and we need to be careful of these things because they really do cause problems. I think the first thing that I just want to quickly do is actually state out some of the requirements of a valid customary marriage. And the first one, it says the lobola must be fixed. I'm just reading from my template for transparency purposes. And the second one, the marriage must be negotiated, celebrated, and conducted in terms of customary law. They also say that the other one says the couple must be consenting adults. If one or more of the parties are minors, below, which meaning they are below the age of 18 years old, both his or her parents or legal guardians must give consent to the marriage. I find that very interesting. The parties must be competent to marry each other, meaning that they must not be blood relatives. neither of the parties should already be in a civil marriage. So are some of the these are some of the requirements of a legal customary marriage according to the customary law. But now, when we come from a cultural point of view, in most cases, cultural marriages are actually covered in mostly three steps. There are three major processes when it comes to traditional marriages. Now, I must point out the fact that this may differ from culture to culture, and how these processes are named may differ from culture to culture. But in essence, these are the top three major steps that actually concludes a traditional marriage. The first step is by the paying of the lobola, which in other words, the dowry is the bridal price. That is the first step. And once this is the step whereby the groom's family will normally write a letter and write a letter to the bride or potential bride's family, requesting a meeting with them. And once that meeting has been arranged, they will formally request the bride to be part of their family. And as part of the process, the bride's family will normally stipulate what we call a bridal price. From a cultural point of view, a bridal price, you are not buying the person, but it is to show appreciation. It's the value aspect that comes with that particular process. So the bride's family will be able to stipulate it. Now, in the olden days, it was in the form of cows. So, for example, they will say that for us to allow you to marry our daughter, we require maybe 7 or 6 cows. And then what will happen in most cases, the groom's family, there will be negotiations until they get to a point or to a price that they all agree. And then once that is agreed, there are signatures, they sign, and in most cases, depending on whether the groom's family has the full amount, if they fully have the full amount, they can pay that amount immediately. If not, the amount can be paid in installments. Then after that, there's an agreement that will sign, and then in most cases, there will be a small celebration where they will cook for the visitors, and then that's about it. And then once the lobola negotiations are over, now meaning that once the lobola amount has been paid in full, comes the second part of traditional marriage. The second part is what we call izinto ezifana no umembeso. Umembeso, this is a part whereby it's a celebration of the successful lobola negotiations. Now, it differs with cultures to cultures. In the Zulu culture, what will normally happen is that the groom's family will normally give gifts to the bride's family as a way to thank them for raising their child. In fact, it's mostly targeted at the bride's mother to say that they are very grateful of the hard work that they've done in terms of raising that child. And that will mostly happen. In some cases, the bride's family might provide a goat as well as a token of appreciation. And in some cultures, it's actually vice versa. It's actually the bride's family that actually buys the groom's family things like clothing, blankets, and all of those things. So that is what we call umembeso. Umembeso, it's a celebration of the successful completion of the lobola negotiations, specifically done once the lobola are finished. Once that is done, the final and very critical stage, there's what we call umabo, or in some cases wembata. This is whereby the bride is taken from her household and taken into the groom's family. This is whereby umuntu uletha egcekeni. This is whereby you are taken to your husband's family. This is now the official, literally, this is the final process of that. That's significant of that process. It's whereby now you are officially introduced to the ancestors of where you are getting married. It's a very critical part of the marriage process, And that's what basically completes our traditional marriages. Unfortunately, I'm going to discuss some of the few things that the average person doesn't know or may not know about customary marriage. First and foremost, customary marriage does not have to be, even though, let me put it this way, even though it may not be registered, it doesn't mean that that marriage is invalid. So, in other words, even if that marriage has not been registered with the Department of Home Affairs, it does not necessarily make that marriage invalid. The respective party, they can still go and register that particular marriage with the Department of Home Affairs. And these are some of the things that they can bring as evidence or proof. A letter which was signed by all delegates at the Lobola negotiation. Remember what I initially said, that at that process, when they sit and they discuss the bridal price and everything, there's going to be signatures and people will agree. If they can bring that, and as well as photos from a ceremony which was performed in line of confirming the marriage, for example, umabo, umembeso, and etc. So therefore, which means if you can bring that as well, the pictures that show that there was actually a ceremony that had taken place, those are some of the things that you can actually have. Sorry, I think we're about to have some load shedding. Let me just do that. Just do that. Oh my goodness. Let's just do that. Okay. Okay. Right. Sorry for that. So basically those are some of the things that they can bring. Now, the other important thing that people don't know, so which means therefore it doesn't have to be necessarily registered for it to be valid. It can still be valid without actually being formally registered. Two, one of the things that we've picked up with case law, number two, we've found that there are cases whereby the lobola does not necessarily need to be paid in full for that customary marriage to be actually recognized by the Department of Home Affairs. One of the famous cases was WHP and his wife Lerato, whereby WHP had been, it was said that he had not paid the lobola in full, whereby he only, I think he was initially charged 45,000 rands, and then he had agreed to only pay 30,000 rands, and then the balance he was going to pay it in two installments, 10,000 and 5,000 rands. And then I think at some point Lerato's mom or relative had actually confirmed that I think WHP had transferred something to the effect of 35,000 rands. Now, the problem is that that was actually the last of it. And then when WHP, he had actually not completed the whole process. Now, WHP's family had argued that we cannot say that Lerato is our family because first and foremost, we did not finish paying her lobola. And number two, she had not been brought to the family. She has not been transferred to the family officially, so therefore we do not recognize their customary marriage. And unfortunately, the court had actually decided that unfortunately the concept of handing over the bride to the groom's family was somehow prejudiced against the bride in most cases, and hence would actually also not become a compulsory requirement to complete that customary marriage. And then they would actually grant those that particular civil, that particular customary marriage. Now, the problem that we have is we now have a situation whereby you have the current law, which is at loggerheads with our culture, whereby, in terms of our culture as Africans, the three stages of that marriage process are significant to concluding a valid and a marriage that can be recognized by our forefathers and how we do things. I find it problematic in a sense that now it makes me feel that in most cases now the courts become the judge, whereby they take away the power from the people who are getting married. They take away the power from our traditional structures, and they basically make their own decisions without really respecting culture, because culture says that for a marriage to be 100% complete, all of these three ceremonies need to be conducted. And unfortunately, if they are not all conducted, you cannot technically say that there is a marriage, because especially the transferring of the bride, which is where the bride is brought to the groom's family, that is a very important step, because there are certain rituals that are performed there, whereby as part of the ritual, the bride is accepted into the groom's family officially, which in most cases in the African culture we refer it to as ukuthelwa ngenyongo. This is whereby you are now introduced to the ancestors of that family that you're getting married to. Unfortunately, the court denying cultures from having that possibilities, that we're going to have all of these customary marriages that are recognized by law, but from the cultural point of view are invalid. The court argues, one of its key arguments is that with customary law, it's very flexible and highly dynamic, and it changes all the time, of which I agree with that. However, then it becomes a problem when, if certain marriages and certain customary marriages are granted purely on the basis of certain and partial steps being completed without the sufficient evidence that everything has been completed, and it becomes a very big problem. The other case that I think I was reading, where a gentleman had loboled a certain lady, I forgot the case, and then what happened in that particular scenario, this gentleman and this lady, they broke up. He had paid lobola but not in full. They had broke up, and then they, subsequent to that, had gotten into civil marriages. Now, what had happened is that when this gentleman died, and for some reason this ex-wife had learned that this man had an estate of 3 million rands, she actually went and challenged for that estate. And the court had found that because they had initially gotten into that customary marriage where there was lobola paid and all of those things, it had subsequently made the civil marriages that they had gotten into invalid, which means it was null and void. Oh, my daughter. Commercial law 1A, I did law first year at varsity. Professor Skuman would be proud of me. So those are some of the things that are happening. So in other words, so if you have relatives that probably, you just took out lobola for someone, and then subsequent to that you guys decided to break up, technically speaking, you are still legally married, and any marriage that you get into is subsequently null and void. So which means now, when you bring it in context of Pabi Moloi's question, if the case law that we've seen is anything to go by, then Sis Pabi might be in big trouble in terms of if the husband can prove that there was lobola that was paid, if he can provide those pictures that he was talking about, things are going to be very difficult for Sis Pabi Moloi, because she's rumored to be having a property portfolio worth at least 6 million rands alone, and other investment and all of those things. So normally these cases, they involve spouses that had been deceased. It's going to be very interesting to see one where both parties are still alive, and it's more of a divorce scenario rather than challenging for an estate of a particular person. So it should be very interesting. But remember, the key things that you must remember about customary law is that, number one, by virtue of starting that process, customary law is by default in community of property. So which means when you get married there, it becomes a joint estate. The only way you can sort of like manage that is that prior to even commencing that process, you can then come across a lawyer and begin to sign uh, what we normally know as an ANC contract in South Africa. In the US, it's called a prenup, so that you begin to determine how your assets are actually structured so that you avoid certain things. So those are some of the things that you just need to be careful of. I foresee a lot of people falling in the trap of Pabi Moloi, because I also had been under the impression that customary law also respects our laws, whereby all three processes need to be there, but apparently you don't have to have certified all three phases of a traditional marriage. Simply today, by just showing up for lobola negotiations, according to the law, you are already married. I may be quoting it wrong, but with the case laws that I've seen, it seems like that's the case, because we've seen cases whereby lobola is important, but it's not the important thing. The transferal of the bride to the groom's family is important, but it cannot be treated as a compulsory thing. So many of the cases, people have been really winning the cases by simply proving that the person once came to my family, and then they paid lobola in half or in quarter, and that was basically it. They were married. So be wise, know what you're doing, because I foresee a lot of Pabi Moloi stories, because there's a perception where people think that, no, we'll do the lobola process and then we can do the wedding. Oh, chief. Once you complete the lobola process, if you did not specify prior to that, you are married under the customary law in community of property. So be ready for that. Don't be surprised. Be alert and design your life accordingly. I'm not fit to say which one is which, what you must do, but just be aware. Those are the things that I do encourage you to go and research for yourself and understand these things, because it's often these things become problems, especially when we pass on. There's normally a bitter fight between the families and the spouse that is left behind. So it's better that you know what you're getting into. Away.